Good morning and welcome as we start a new sermon series today. Pastor Dawn will be looking over the next several weeks. Actually, I will be assisting her with one of those, a place to call home. And the first session of that is our Father's house. And the scripture is Luke 2:41 through 52. Which I think you will recognize. Each year, his parents went to Jerusalem for the Passover festival. When he was 12 years old, they went up to Jerusalem according to their custom. After the festival was over, they were returning home, but the boy Jesus stayed behind in Jerusalem. His parents didn't know it. Supposing he was among their band of travelers, they journeyed on for a full day while looking for him among their family and friends. When they didn't find Jesus, they returned to Jerusalem to look for him. After 3 days, they found him in the temple. He was sitting among the teachers, listening to them and putting questions to them. Everyone who heard him was amazed by his understanding and his answers. When his parents saw him, they were shocked. His mother said, "Child, why have you treated us like this? Listen, your father and I have been worried. We've been looking for you." Jesus replied, "Why were you looking for me? Didn't you know that it was necessary for me to be in my Father's house?" But they didn't understand what he said to them. Jesus went down to Nazareth with them and was obedient to them. His mother cherished every word in his heart. Jesus matured in wisdom and years and in favor with God and with people. There are several things that as I said, we recognize this scripture, but there are several things that, as I was looking at it today, that have stood out to me that I either didn't recognize before or had faded from my memory.
Forgotten, perhaps?
Uh-oh.
Yes, you could say forgotten. They were going to the Passover festival feast. There were several festivals that, under Jewish law, that every male within 15 miles of Jerusalem was mandated to attend those festivals. Passover and Pentecost, two happened earlier in the year. I'm not sure of the whole list of them. I know there was another festival in the fall, and Pentecost and the festival in the fall centered around the harvest. The winter crops would be harvested around the time of Pentecost, and then the summer crops would be harvested in the fall when the other celebration took place. Jesus' family lived, I think, further than 15 miles. But like I said, 15 miles was the mandate. And Luke tells us that that they were going to the Passover festival, that they had done this each year. And it says when Jesus was 12 years old, they went up to Jerusalem. The significance of the 12 years old is one of the things that I either didn't know or had faded from my memory. Under the Jewish culture, a boy becomes a man at 12 years old. That's the just a tradition in their culture that a young boy is considered a young man at that age of 12 years old. So, as I said, it was mandated by law that Jewish males would attend these festivals each year. So that's significant in calling out that when Jesus was 12 years old, in all probability, he had not accompanied his parents prior to this. And this was his first, more than likely, his first attendance at the Passover festival because of this transition in his status under their culture. The thought that he could get lost, that his parents wouldn't know that he was with them as they departed Jerusalem. they did not travel individually. The road to and from Jerusalem, as I said, Jerusalem is up here on a mountaintop, very closely approximating the peaks of Otter, the difference in elevation there above sea level. And so to depart from Jerusalem meant you had to go down. Conversely, as you were going into Jerusalem, you had to go up the mountain. This road was twisty, mountain paths meander back and forth to take advantage of the terrain, gaps in the terrain that make it less steep. And so people traveled in groups because it was hazardous. Bandits would set upon individual or small groups of travelers. The larger the group, the less likelihood that you were going to be attacked by these bandits and robbed as you were traveling along the road. So they traveled in groups. More than likely it was large family groups that traveled together. And there was also part of their custom that the women and children could not travel as fast as the men, and so they left earlier in the day before the men did. The men hung around and would depart later, and with the difference in travel, they would catch up to the women at about the time to gather for the evening, to have an evening meal together. So when you understand that, it's entirely plausible that neither Mary or Joseph would realize that Jesus wasn't with them until they got to be together and realize that somehow or another he had escaped their watch and was somewhere back along the way or still in Jerusalem. So Scripture says that they set out and returned to Jerusalem, retracing their steps, and looked for 3 days in Jerusalem before they found him in the temple courts. Now, in the aftermath of the Passover festival, the teachers, the rabbis, and the Sadducees would gather in a court and hold court, so to speak, and teaching to the people that wanted to come and to take part in that. And Jesus is with one of these groups of people when they finally found him. The way that Mary talks to Jesus is, says, "Child, why have you treated us like this? Listen, your father and I have been worried. We've been looking for you," indicating that Jesus has misbehaved here. And depending on the tone of voice that you read his reply, it's entirely possible, given the age, 12, almost a teenager, to hear some sarcasm in Jesus' voice. We don't know his character as a boy at this age. This is the only reference that we have to draw upon. So there are many different ways that you can interpret Jesus' reply based on his tone of voice, facial expression, things that we don't have here. But he says, "Why were you looking for me? Didn't you know that it was necessary for me to be in my Father's house?" Now this is another part that I had not picked up on before. It starts out Luke saying that, or Mary saying, "Your father and I have been looking for you." And then Jesus here in his response, he says, "Didn't you know that I must be in my Father's house?" So that there's a change that that's occurred here, that it seems that in this time that Jesus has spent with the teachers and the questioning that's going back and forth, that he's had an epiphany, a realization of who he is and his relationship to God. I think that as he was getting older, that he was realizing that there was something different about his relationship and trying to sort that all out. And I think that's the whole purpose of Luke recording this event here, is that there's this epiphany that Jesus, the human being, understands that this relationship that he has with God, and referring to God as his Father. And it goes on to say that in the last verse, Jesus matured in wisdom and years and in favor with God and with people. Barclay points out that this is 4 ways that Jesus changes as he matures into an adult that we catch up later in his ministry, starting with John the Baptist. He grows in wisdom. There's a difference between knowledge and wisdom, and Luke is using the word wisdom here, in that he wasn't just gaining knowledge. There was an understanding that he was having to go along with that knowledge. Stature, in other words, he got older, and as you get older, you have more standing within your community, especially in their community, where the older people had a higher place than they do in our American culture here today. He also matured in his relationship with God, and also his relationship with other people as he was growing. Now, I've shared this with you all before. Luke set out to make an orderly account of the life of Jesus. And in doing so, it's reasonable that he would have had conversations with as many people as he could that had direct, that had a relationship with Jesus. And that Mary was still alive during this period of time. There is information in Luke's gospel that could only have come from someone like Mary. And it's entirely possible and very likely that one of the sources for the Gospel of Luke was Mary, the mother of Jesus. And this passage that we have here today could only have come from a family member who was there and a part of that group. So if it wasn't Mary, then it was somebody else who was very close to the family that would have observed and been aware of this. Any insights that might have come to you as I was talking about this, or observations that you have about this event that took part in Jesus' life here?
Well, Luke could have been written by Mary.
Pardon me?
Luke could have been written by Mary.
Oh, yes.
And have his name on it.
Yeah, that's entirely possible.
Because I've read other places that they think that a woman wrote some of the New Testament, but has Paul's name because people will read it if it has his name.
That was a practice in writing during this period of time. Not only for a woman to have a man's name that elevated the stature of it, but to have a well-known person's name attributed to the writing also for the same purpose of elevating the stature of what was being published there. Well, as I said, this is a new sermon series, and as it so happens, Pastor Dawn is going to be on vacation this coming week, and so I get to start this sermon series. So later on this morning, you'll be listening to me as I take this passage and unpack it a little bit further. I hope that you'll be joining us for our worship. and may God's blessings be upon you.